Just over 1 year ago, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning was released. And if there's one thing that you know about that movie, even if you never saw it, it's probably this. This insane stunt in which Tom Cruise jumps a motorcycle off of a cliff was the centerpiece of all the marketing. It was the poster. It was the big moment at the end of the trailer. They played a whole mini documentary in IMAX theaters that was just about how they created this one moment. Years from now, the movie will be remembered as the one where he rides the bike off the cliff. But this is also a narrative film, not just a stunt show. So in the actual context of the story, why is Ethan Hunt riding a motorcycle off a cliff? That's not a thing that people normally do. Is he trying to get somewhere? Well, as we learn in the movie, yes, he is trying to get somewhere. The whole insane move of jumping off of a mountain is actually a big attempt to get on board a train. Because as cool and exciting as the stunt is, in the actual movie, that's not the climactic moment. It's actually over pretty quickly. Because it's really just a means of getting us to what the actual centerpiece of the movie is. And it's something positively old-fashioned. A train scene. In fact, pretty much the entire last 45 minutes of the film are centered around the Orient Express. It's a sequence that involves espionage and secret deals in train compartments. It has people trying to get on board a moving train, fights on the roof of the train, a runaway out-of-control train, and it all culminates in a bridge collapsing and the train crashing. It's a sequence that calls back to an entire century's worth of cinema, from Buster Keaton to Alfred Hitchcock to Tony Scott. It's like a video essay on train movies in the form of one of the best sustained action sequences ever made, which really makes this video essay look super lame in comparison. And this also isn't even the first time the Mission Impossible series devoted serious time to trains. In Ghost Protocol, the secret IMF base is located inside a freight car on a train. And of course, the big action climax of the very first movie happens inside and on top of the Eurostar. So am I just using this topic as an excuse to talk about my favorite movie series? Maybe just a teensy-weensy little bit, but in all honesty, I don't need an excuse to talk about Mission Impossible. At this point, I'm pretty sure I do it in my sleep. But I do think it's noteworthy that in this era of massive blockbuster CGI battles, of superhero movies and energy beams and spaceships and photorealistic talking animated animals, we're still returning to something that has been enthralling audiences since the very beginning of cinema. Something that represents progress, but also history. Romance, but also danger. Metaphorical penis, but also literal mode of transportation. That's right, it's another vehicular episode. So trains, load up on coal, release the handbrake, and chug on down the track. Because today, I choose you. Hello from the Swiss Alps, and another episode of Nobbles kicked me out of the studio, so I'm making videos in Europe for a month. And if you have a better idea for what to call this series, then you can let me know in a handwritten letter that you can send to our P.O. box. But anyway, the Alps. This, I'm pretty sure is the most beautiful place I've ever been. There are mountains everywhere, there's lakes all over the place, waterfalls. It is staggering. I got here about a week ago from Monaco by taking a 9-hour train ride, and it ruled. As most people are aware, the trains in Europe are so much nicer and more comfortable and faster than they are in the US. The whole experience is better, and the scenery is incredible. And as the train went through Italy and then up all the way through Switzerland and into the Alps, I was looking out the window at the scenery, thinking, this reminds me a lot of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. And that's when I started to think about what I believe to be an undeniable truth of cinema. That all of the best movies have trains. Like, I struggle to think of a movie that would not be improved by the addition of a train. Like, even movies set on small, isolated locations, like Speed, which is set on a bus, Speed was smart and understood that for the third act action finale, set it on a train. So what is it about train movies? Why have filmmakers been so obsessed with trains for well over 100 years? Why does every movie seem to improve when you add a train? Empire magazine once called trains, quote, the greatest dramatis persona in screen history. Hyperbolic? Yes. Accurate? Also yes. Our friend Nando over at Nando v Movies made a video last year about how so many superhero movies have major train sequences. And he's right. Seriously. There are a lot. But really, this just kind of goes for action movies in general, a genre that trains are uniquely suited for. But trains are also great in romantic movies, and comedies, and thrillers, and mysteries, even horror movies, and musicals, but especially action movies. So yes, trains are inherently cool, and also they are essential infrastructure for a functioning society, which is why, I'm sorry, but Los Angeles is not a real city. Whatever, come at me LA people, and I'm sorry, you won't get here in time because you're stuck in traffic. Now, I know we just made a whole episode about cars and how cool car movies are, and now we're here talking about how actually train movies are the best. But look, what I'm really trying to say is that movies about big metal things going really fast are great. And if you disagree with that, then I want you to go buy a train ticket and get on a train and take it to the nearest lake, and then jump in said lake. And if you're still somehow doubting the power of train movies, or think that I sound like an aging boomer with a train collection in my basement, consider that in The Fabelmans, we learned that Steven Spielberg's whole career would not exist were it not for a train scene in a movie. So in this episode, we're going to answer some questions. What do trains represent cinematically? What narrative purpose do they serve? Why are they so uniquely suited for cinema? Why do directors drive themselves and their crews and the studios totally insane, building entire railroads and crashing trains and just dealing with the insane hassle of filming on trains when there are obviously much easier ways to make movies? Why do trains constantly recur in not just action movies, but in literally every genre of film? Why are train movies almost always good, or at least train scenes make any movie better? Well, these questions and more will be answered, but to get there, we're gonna need some context. We first need to explore a brief history of train movies. The history of cinema began with a train, and it is as if this train has been driving into film history ever since, as if destined to return unendingly. It crisscrosses the Lumiere films and their ghost train journeys. It drives the phantom rides of early cinema, and is then embraced with open arms by the avant-garde as one of the primary motifs of the cinematograph. A motif which, more than almost any other, allows us to engage with the modern experience of visuality. The steam engine was invented in 1802, and soon after, this incredible new mode of travel spread rapidly around the world. In 1829, the first steam railroad opened in the US, and that would soon become the standard means of mass long-distance travel. Long before cinema existed, trains were a part of daily life. It wouldn't be until 1955 that more people traveled by plane than by train. And so, once motion picture cameras were invented and started being used to tell stories, trains became the subject of some of the very earliest works of cinema. And why not? These were commonplace things that were easily accessible in most cities and towns that were also massive metal machines, just like big, spectacular feats of engineering. A train is like a real-life special effect, a spectacular sight that already exists in the real world. You get huge production value just by pointing your camera at a train. Arguably the most famous film from before the 20th century was the Lumière brothers' L'arrivée d'un train en gare de la Ciotat. I'm sorry, I think I've been in Europe for too long. So yeah, what I'm talking about here is the train arriving at the station movie. The one that has the whole legend about audiences fleeing the theater, thinking that the train was going to come through the screen and crash into them. Although really, this is most likely just an urban legend, with no evidence that it ever happened, because the train killed all the witnesses. But potential unsolved murders aside, this is the first train movie. And soon after, we got a lot more. In 1903, just 3 years after the actual Butch Cassidy robbed an actual Union Pacific Railroad train, one of the very first narrative films ever made in North America was Edwin S. Porter's The Great Train Robbery. A film that would establish something cinema would return to countless times: the Western train robbery sequence. We would see this again in The Professionals, The Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Long Riders, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, The Harder They Fall, Sholay, an episode of Breaking Bad, an episode of Firefly, and of course, this new Salesforce commercial starring Matthew McConaughey. But even in the silent era, trains were a major recurring part of movies. In 1923, trains were a major part of La Rue, Abel Gance's 9-hour epic. In 1926, much of Exit Smiling, a comedy about a traveling theater troupe, was set aboard a train. 1929's The Wrecker featured a massive crash scene between a train and a truck that was filmed simultaneously with 22 cameras. And of course, in 1926, there was Buster Keaton's The General. Still one of the greatest movies ever made, and still a top contender for the best train movie ever made. It's filled wall-to-wall with some of the most spectacular train footage ever filmed. It is the kind of movie that even now you look at it and think, this must have taken years to film and killed at least several people in the process. It's the train movie that every other train movie to this day is still trying to top. Up until the 1960s, arguably the most popular genre in American fiction was the Western. And even before The Great Train Robbery was made, trains have been a major part of the genre. Frank Gruber, writer of countless Western novels and screenplays, claimed there were really only 7 plots for Westerns, and the very first of these plots was, quote, the Union Pacific story. The plot concerns construction of a railroad, a telegraph line, or some other type of modern technology or transportation. And so, in many early Western films, like John Ford's The Iron Horse, or How the West Was Won, the railroad represented progress as American civilization tamed the wild frontier and united the country coast to coast. That idea would be subverted by Sergio Leone in Once Upon a Time in the West, his postmodern take on the classic American Western, which presents the coming of the railroad as the death of an era of freedom. As Christopher Frayling describes it, lamenting the end of the Golden Age and of the Western as fable. And weirdly, 2 of the most disastrous would-be blockbusters of my lifetime were big-budget Westerns whose plots revolved around the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. I'm talking, of course, about Wild Wild West and The Lone Ranger. But like, seriously, both movies literally have scenes in their third acts with the ceremony to celebrate the completion of the railroad, which then leads into the big action finale. And if you'll pardon the pun, both movies went off the rails due to highly questionable choices, like a giant steampunk spider and casting Johnny Depp as a Native American. That said, the train sequence in The Lone Ranger is genuinely one of the greatest action scenes of all time, and we are going to talk about it later. In many westerns, the story begins with characters arriving in a town via train. Once Upon a Time in the West has probably the most iconic version of this, with the first 10 minutes of the film spent with 3 gunmen waiting for a train to arrive, and when it does, the resulting shootout kills them all. Even some more modern neo-westerns begin with characters arriving via train, like Bad Day at Black Rock, Dead Man, and Killers of the Flower Moon. Some westerns spend the whole movie waiting for people to arrive on a train, like High Noon, or they are about catching a very specific train at a very specific time, like 3:10 to Yuma, or Back to the Future Part 3. Another thing worth noting, westerns are full of people riding horses, which are perfect for chasing after a train and then jumping from the horse onto the train. Even teenage Indiana Jones does it. Trust me, this works way better than jumping onto a train from a car, which you almost never see. While trains would remain a major part of the Western genre, their cinematic reach stretched much further than that. So beyond what the train means on a thematic level, beyond just movies set in the 1800s, what is it about trains that makes them work so well on screen? Setting a story on a train creates certain constraints. But as we know, when it comes to art, constraints usually lead to creative solutions. As limiting as the setting of a train might seem, this one long, narrow vehicle that moves along a fixed track, it allows seemingly infinite storytelling possibilities. Some of this next part may seem a bit obvious, but stick with me because it's important. Once the characters board the train and it pulls out of the station, they are all essentially stuck in this new world. It's a world where each car is essentially its own room, like we see in this one shot from the Darjeeling Limited, where each character has their own room with its own look. And that idea is taken way further in Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer, where there's literally a whole society on board a train, with a school and a restaurant and even a sauna. Because the train is so narrow, there are only 2 directions one can travel through it. Forwards or backwards. Or forwards or backwards. So the only way to get to a room near the front of the train is to walk through every other room in order. And due to it being so narrow, you usually have to go single file. The great duality of trains is that they are simultaneously a vehicle and a location. Many train movies never feature the conductor at all. They might as well be about people in a house that happens to be moving, with bedrooms, a dining room, and often even a bar. But these rooms are also constantly in motion. Then other train movies are literally about 1 or 2 people driving a train as if it was a car on rails, as they work the engine and the brakes and refuel it. The train can lean further in either direction depending on what the story demands, and in many movies, both aspects are used. You can have a dialogue scene, just 2 people talking as they would anywhere else. But on a train, the entire time the background is whooshing by behind them, and subconsciously, we're aware that they are moving toward their destination. It gives any conversation an extra sense of momentum, and it's also just more visually interesting with a constantly changing background. While we understand that trains are driven by people, except for the trains in Thomas the Tank Engine, which have no drivers and kind of are people themselves. So like, wait, do they have skeletal structures? Their faces move. Do they have muscles in there? Do they have souls? Okay, we can't interrogate that right now. We would be here all day. That is a topic for other people to worry about. Let's get back on track. Anyway, while we understand that trains are driven by people wearing goofy-looking hats, those people rarely play a role in train movies. Usually, the train conductors are unseen, and the train is presented as simply a thing that moves on its own along a fixed route and, most importantly, a fixed schedule. There's a reason that a phrase like, "the train has left the station," has become a well-known idiom. Trains are like the paths of the sun or the moon. They are forces of nature too powerful for any of us to control. While trains in the real world, like, and I'm not picking this because of any particular beef, the motherfucking F train will have delays and not run when they're supposed to, trains conceptually are meant to adhere to a rigid schedule, departing at a specific time and arriving at a specific time. And in movies, trains usually run on time. And because trains are these huge metal machines driven by absurdly powerful engines, so unstoppable that Tony Scott made a great movie about them called Unstoppable that, yes, we will be discussing soon, we understand that the train will not stop for anyone. The characters are at the mercy of the train's timetable, and they must adhere to that timetable, and that timetable plays a huge role in countless movies. Wes Anderson's extremely underrated train movie, The Darjeeling Limited, opens with Bill Murray's mad dash through a city in India trying to catch a train, but he just misses it. Instead, Adrian Brody runs ahead of him and makes it on board, and thus, the film leaves Bill Murray behind and follows its new protagonist. It doesn't matter how big a movie star you are, if you miss the train, you miss being in the movie. Or sometimes, missing a train can create a whole parallel reality. The expression sliding doors scenario has entered into popular use, but its origin is the 1998 movie in which Gwyneth Paltrow, catching a train or missing it, leads to her life going in two very different directions. But Sliding Doors wasn't even the first movie to do that. A decade earlier, Krzysztof Kieślowski's Blind Chance had a similar premise involving a character trying to catch a train that resulted in 3 different parallel timelines. One classic Western movie that was remade as a modern classic Western movie is all about catching a specific train, the 310 that's going to Yuma. And a less classic modern movie is named after a specific train leaving at 15:17 and going to Paris. Only the first 16 minutes of Before Sunrise take place on a train, yet we think of it as a train movie. The train is essential to the movie's construction. It's a story about people who only have a limited amount of time together. The film begins on a train where Jesse and Celine meet, and it ends at a station where Celine has to catch a train home. Because of the nature of a train schedule and its constant movement toward its destination, right from the start, it creates this sense of a ticking clock. Jesse and Celine want the day to last forever, but it can't. Time runs out. The train is going to leave, and they, like all of us, are at the mercy of the train schedule. In that way, trains are like life, constantly moving forward, largely out of your control, and so all you can do is control what you do within it. And that sounds just like the kind of pretentious 20-something nonsense that Jesse would say in that movie. Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train is a very different kind of movie, but there's a similar idea at play. Once again, only the beginning of the film takes place on the train, but here, we once again have 2 strangers meeting on the train, and that meeting sets events in motion that, like a train, cannot be stopped. The whole third act is a ticking clock, trying to stop this guy from framing the main character for a murder. Because trains will not stop for anyone, characters in movies are constantly trying to get onto them when they're already moving. It's difficult, but it is more feasible than getting onto most other moving vehicles. Like in Speed, look how hard it is for Keanu to get onto that moving bus. People trying to board moving trains is often used for great comedic effect, like in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, or in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And then there's the Bollywood classic Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, where at the end of the film, Raj pulls Simran onto a moving train. Here the movie is telling us that their love is stronger than the force of the train, and that train will not keep them apart. In Hindi cinema, this scene is so iconic that Shah Rukh Khan, the star of the movie, literally did an homage to his own film in Chennai Express. And while we're talking about Shah Rukh Khan here, the guy cannot get enough of trains. Here he is climbing along the side of a train in Ra 1, and here he is in Dil Se doing a whole musical number on top of a moving train. And last year, with Pathaan and Jawan, he made 2 different movies that both have major train set pieces. But okay, jumping back to American movies. In the 1970s train classic Silver Streak, there's a running gag where Gene Wilder gets thrown or knocked off of the train 3 times in the movie. And each time, he has to find a new way to catch up to the train and get back on. Emperor of the North, an insane train movie about hobos battling an evil train conductor played by Ernest Borgnine, makes the entire movie about people just trying to hitch a ride on board a train. It gets 2 hours of material out of people repeatedly trying to jump on board a moving train. And it's awesome. So once the characters finally make it on board, they are all stuck together in this intimate setting for the duration of the journey. Setting a movie on a train is essentially making a bottle episode. If the bottle was
a missile the size of the Chrysler Building.
And this is why trains are such perfect locations for thrillers. The setting of a train inherently provides a degree of suspense. It's a claustrophobic, cramped environment. There's nowhere to run, and jumping off of a moving train could very likely kill you. There's a lack of control because no matter what you do, the train will inexorably keep moving forward. Alfred Hitchcock, whose hobby as a boy, I kid you not, was collecting train timetables from around the world, would go on to repeatedly return to trains as a setting and narrative device in his films. The third act of Number 17, one of Hitchcock's earliest films, takes place entirely aboard a train, as a group of thieves attempt to escape on a train, but instead become trapped on board as the train keeps accelerating to dangerous speeds, eventually having a huge crash. Both the 39 Steps and North by Northwest feature wrongfully accused men fleeing on trains, where they end up meeting the women with whom they will soon fall in love. The iconic climax of Shadow of a Doubt takes place on a train, and most significantly, The Lady Vanishes is a locked room mystery set entirely aboard a moving train. And that's also how I would describe Murder on the Orient Express, which is a perfect setting for such a story. A cast of characters boards a train, then gets stuck in the middle of nowhere due to heavy snow, so when a murder is committed, all of the suspects are trapped together with no means of escape. It works so well that you understand why they keep adapting it over and over and over again, and probably will long after we're all dead. A train is used to brilliant effect in Akira Kurosawa's High and Low. In one sequence, a kidnapper demands the handoff of ransom money happens on board a train. So Gondo, the main character, is ordered to bring the money in cases of a specific thickness that have to be dropped from the narrow train windows. And of course, because this is a train, it's not going to stop and he has to do it at a specific moment. There's a ticking clock, he has a narrow window of time to drop money out of a narrow window, the cramped setting makes everything more stressful, and it all creates one of the best train sequences of all time. But arguably the ultimate train thriller is Richard Fleischer's The Narrow Margin from 1952. It's about a detective escorting a witness on a train from Chicago to LA, but there are hitmen on the train who want to kill her. So they're all stuck on there together in a tight space with no escape, and the detective has to keep her alive until they reach the destination. Terrific movie, and also, it's only 72 minutes long. The aforementioned Silver Streak also introduces a murder mystery on a train. And really, this is one of the ultimate train movies, since it uses so many aspects of them. It's a thriller and an action movie, but mostly it's a comedy that understands that narrow train hallways can be great for people awkwardly trying to squeeze by each other. The confined space of a train is really perfect for comedies, where characters keep bumping into each other and hiding in compartments, like in Howard Hawks' 20th Century, or Preston Sturges' The Palm Beach Story. Plus, trains sometimes have a bar on board, a place where characters can get drunk, which is how you get a sequence like the one in the Palm Beach Story, where a hunting club of rich guys all get totally trashed and shoot up the train so the conductor literally unhitches their car and leaves them behind. And then there's the train sequence in Trading Places, where our heroes have to swap real reports for forgeries while in a cramped compartment on a train that just happens to be having a New Year's Eve costume party, using only their wits, crazy outfits, and the highly questionable idea to put Dan Aykroyd in blackface. But the real advantage of the confined space of a train is that it's an ideal place for strangers to meet and spend time together. We've already talked about Strangers on a Train, a movie about two strangers meeting on a train. But really where this comes into play the most is in love stories.
You know, every great romance or mystery has a train in it.
Because of their sense of history and luxury, we're disregarding the Ethan Allen Express here, there is an inherent romance to trains. They don't have any of the hassles of air travel. There are no security checkpoints, no cramped seats or stale air. There's room to move around and even a dining car where you can talk over a meal. So in Before Sunrise, when Jesse and Celine meet and then move to the dining car, that's like their first date. In DDLJ, Raj and Simran first meet when he helps her board the train, and they don't get along at first, but hey, now they're stuck together on a train, so who knows? Maybe they'll fall in love. And there are so many more examples of people meeting and falling in love on trains. Casino Royale, and Some Like It Hot, and Silver Streak, and North by Northwest, and of course, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, in which Steve Martin fools a passenger into buying him an expensive lunch, while Michael Caine looks on and, I believe, falls deeply in love with him. Trains are so sexy that in Risky Business, Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay literally get on a train just to have sex, which to me seems kind of weird and uncomfortable, but hey, some people just can't deny the sultry allure of these fast metal tubes. And I'm not allowed to show that clip because of YouTube censorship rules, so instead, here's Tom Cruise sliding into a room in his underwear. And while we're on the subject of trains and sex, there is, of course, the final shot of North by Northwest, which really speaks for itself. As one of the great minds of our time once said,
"Just be told I've always wanted to take a train. It's so sexy. You never know who's going to be getting on and getting me off."
See, the thing about Samantha is that she's really horny. But anyway, speaking of trains and romance, we of course have to talk about train stations. Truly one of the great movie locations. They're a place where people are greeting each other or they're saying goodbye. And they are way, way better than airports because in train stations, anyone can walk right up to the train platform, which is a huge help for storytelling. Sadly, gone now are the days of people running up to the airport gate to stop someone from getting on a plane. Just one of the many things that 9/11 took from us. Train stations are places where paths converge. In Ocean Waves, characters meet again after years when they see each other across the train platform. I mean, it's where the Browns met Paddington. What more evidence do you need? Brian De Palma is one of the kings of the train station, setting major set pieces in multiple movies there. I'm talking about The Untouchables and Carlito's Way, as well as Mission Impossible, because a train station in London is where Ethan Hunt discovers that Jim Phelps is still alive. But really, train stations are about romance. This is why The Train Station Goodbye, where two characters tearfully embrace while one steps up onto the train and it pulls away, is a trope that will always work. Because as we've already established, by nature of a train, this is something out of the character's control. They are being pulled away by forces more powerful than themselves. It's fate. Before Sunrise ends with them saying goodbye as they board separate trains. And we see this in countless other films, like Call Me By Your Name, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, No Time to Die, Dr. Zhivago, and one of the best versions, Closely Watched Trains, where a train pulls the couple apart just before they can kiss. Heartbreaking. Sorry about the bird there. But the ultimate train station romance movie is David Lean's Brief Encounter. It's about two people who meet when their paths converge at a train station, and their encounters are dictated by when they end up in the same place by train. But their time is limited because at the end of each day, they have to catch their respective trains home. Here, the trains represent the inalterable force of the universe. It brings them together and then eventually pulls them apart. Despite their love, their trains will always be going in different directions. Okay, let's get pretentious. I think a part of why so many movies are about trains, why filmmakers keep returning to trains after all these years, is that trains are kind of a metaphor for movies. In cinema, unlike, say, literature, the viewer is not in control. The pace is set by the filmmakers. The audience has to sit back and experience it until the film reaches its destination. The movie is like a train. It is on rails, it's constantly in motion, it keeps moving forward along a set path until the end. The tracks are what makes this a cleaner metaphor than a bus or a plane, which can take detours or different routes. And as Lars von Trier showed us in the opening moments of Europa, there is a great visual similarity between the image of a train moving over the tracks and film running through a projector. Thus, the train, like cinema itself, functions both as a machine to organize the gaze and as a generator of linearity and movement. There is therefore a technical affinity between cinema and the railway, or rather between the machines that comprise them, the locomotive, the wagon, and the projector. Like the railway, cinema constitutes a new temporality, which is not only dependent on the destruction of traditional temporalities, but also bound up with a new value system: the enjoyment of speed, the discovery of foreign places, and the loss of roots. A train ride is fundamentally a journey, a literal one, and in movies, a train is also there to facilitate a metaphorical journey. In The Darjeeling Limited, three brothers board a train for a journey of growth and healing after their father's death. But the train, which is on a fixed path, can't do the work for them. They have to get off and find their own way. And then finally, once they've done the work and grown, they find their way back to the train and discard their dead father's baggage as they reboard the train. In children's stories, a train often takes characters someplace magical where they will learn important lessons and start to grow up. A train transports Harry Potter to Hogwarts. The Polar Express transports children to the North Pole to meet Santa Claus. And then there is one of the great train sequences in cinema history, in Spirited Away. I really hope that you've seen Spirited Away, since it's one of the very best movies ever made, but in case you haven't, it's about an immature young girl who gets separated from her parents when they turn into pigs and ends up in a fantastical world inhabited by spirits. Among other things, it is a coming-of-age story about responsibility and loyalty, and one of the major scenes in it, near the end, involves a train. Chihiro, the young girl, has to leave the bathhouse where she's been working and travel out across a vast ocean to meet with a witch and ask for forgiveness to help a friend, and she gets there by train. a train that goes across the ocean. There's no dialogue in the scene. It's just Chihiro and friends sitting silently on a train for a couple minutes, watching this strange world go by. Everyone else on the train is a spirit, appearing like some sort of shadow person. We see them disembarking and meeting family members on train platforms. Everyone else on the train appears to be a grown-up. Despite the strangeness of this world, this is Chihiro setting foot into a place of adults, taking on an adult responsibility. On the journey, she's taking care of some spirits, one of which is a baby that's been transformed into a mouse. Even though she's a child, she's taking on the role of a parent. Before Chihiro boards the train, she's told that it used to run in both directions, but now it's just a one-way trip. And through the whole scene, she never looks back. She keeps facing forward. This is quietly maybe the best scene in one of the best movies ever made. And trains recur throughout Miyazaki's work, in Kiki's Delivery Service, and The Wind Rises, and Whisper of the Heart, as well as the work of fellow Ghibli director Isao Takahata, in Grave of the Fireflies and Only Yesterday. Also, fun fact, for almost 20 years, Spirited Away was the highest-grossing film in Japanese history, until it was finally surpassed in 2020 by Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba, the movie Mugen Train. That's right, a movie about trains. Okay, a lot of you probably spent this whole episode yelling at the screen going, when's he gonna talk about The Taking of Pelham 123? And obviously, yes, that is one of the best train movies ever. The Tony Scott remake is okay, but the original, a masterpiece. But I've mostly avoided talking about subways here because they're kind of a unique thing, and not all the same attributes of other trains apply to them. So yeah, you have the same tight, confined space as other trains, but they cover really short distances. People are usually on them for minutes, not hours. So strangers usually aren't meeting each other on the train. And they're generally underground, with just darkness outside the windows, and there are no bedrooms or dining cars. And MTA, if you're watching this, please don't get any ideas. Dining cars on the subway would be bad. But the best uses of the subway in cinema utilize aspects consistent in all train cinema. De Palma, he's back again, does two all-timers with really suspenseful scenes in Dress to Kill and Carlito's Way. The French Connection car chase is literally about chasing an elevated subway train. The best part of Scream 6 is the scene with the killer on a crowded subway train. And of course, The Warriors is really a movie about a journey with characters traveling by subway from the Bronx to Coney Island. And it teaches the important lesson that if someone weird gets on a train with you, just mind your own business. And Spider-Man 2? We'll get to it, don't worry. So right now, you're probably thinking, man, I really want to go watch some train movies. Well, two major ones that I haven't talked about much yet are Source Code, Duncan Jones's time loop thriller with Jake Gyllenhaal that is all set on a train, and then Lars von Trier's Europa, his psychological war drama set in post-World War II Germany that is pretty much all based around trains. Well, both of these essential works of train cinema are streaming right now on Mubi, our sponsor for this episode. In case you're new here, I'm a big fan of Mubi, since they're a streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the globe that is hand-curated by people who really love movies. And recently it was announced that Mubi is re-releasing The Fall, the 2006 film by Tarsem, one of the wildest and most beautiful-looking movies of the century. Like, seriously, just look at this. This thing literally took years to shoot. The movie has been unavailable to stream or rent for years, and the Blu-ray is out of print and costs an absurd amount of money. And so Mubi is putting it back in theaters, and then subsequently it will be available to stream on the Mubi app. This is why Mubi rules. They have an incredible library of movies. They are releasing new movies, like some of the biggest hits from this year's Cannes Film Festival, like The Substance, and they're making older movies available to watch. Like right now on Mubi, you can see a whole collection of Kelly Reichardt movies, like Wendy and Lucy and Certain Women, Sean Durkin's The Nest, starring Jude Law and Carrie Coon, which is awesome. The same guy that made The Iron Claw. Richard Linklater's Boyhood, short films by Jonathan Glazer, David Lynch, Yorgos Lanthimos, and I kid you not, Hayao Miyazaki. They've got Francis Ha, Night of the Living Dead, Medicine for Melancholy, Barry Jenkins' first film, Following, Christopher Nolan's first film. Like, I could go on forever. There's so much good stuff on there. You know how other streaming platforms are filled with a million ugly-looking movies that seem fake and that you have to search for like 20 minutes to find anything good? Well, Mubi isn't like that. Mubi is made by movie lovers for movie lovers, so you can always find something great to watch. And you can get 30 days totally free to try it out for yourself by just signing up at Mubi.com/Patrick H. Willems. The link is right there in the description. Signing up helps support this channel, plus you get a ton of amazing movies to watch. And again, it's a whole month for free. It just makes sense. Okay, so now let's move on to the big one, train action scenes. Maybe the greatest of all cinematic uses of trains. This is where we finally get to talk about Unstoppable, and The General, and Spider-Man 2, and Paddington 2, and of course, Under Siege 2: Dark Territory. Wait, sorry, one sec. Oh, shit! Okay, I have to go. I have to catch a train to Zurich right now. I totally lost track of time. So, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna split this episode into two parts. We're gonna do a second episode on trains, and that one is gonna be all about train action scenes. So, I guess that means that we're gonna bring back a series that we haven't done in years.